It's me. My name is Nadia, actually. I'm a UI/UX designer in Bukit Vista, and it's really nice to see you. And I brought some members of my team also, and we have our CTO here, Kabayu, and some like other members as well. So maybe the other can introduce themselves. For
Yeah,
me,
sure.
Kabayu.
Yeah, okay, sure. Hi, Catherine. My name is Bayu. You can just call me Bayu. Currently, I'm CTO at our company, Bukit Vista. So we are a hospitality company, property management in Bali. We manage vacation. We try to new market with technology. So that's why right now we have a relatively new product development team. So that's why we want to learn from you with your experience. I see your LinkedIn page actually that you work at GitLab. So I think GitLab is an example of software that almost everyone use actually, mostly software developers, right? So I'm wondering how you approach that, how you create a good user experience for GitLab. So looking forward, Catherine.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you.
Yes, next to the other one, Aldo, please.
Okay, so good morning from here, from Bali. Actually, my name is Aldo. I'm here as a UI UX designer at Bukit Vista, and looking forward to hear from you for all the knowledge that you have.
Yes, thank you. Oh, maybe it's Neil.
Okay, hello. My name is Neil. You can call me Neil. I'm a backend developer intern in Bukit Vista. And looking forward to learn a lot from you, Catherine.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Neil.
Yeah, hello, Chris. Can you introduce yourself to Katherine?
Hello. Hello, Catherine. So, my name is Chris. I'm also a backend developer intern in Bukit Vista. So, yeah, the same as Neil. Looking forward to learn a lot from you. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, so maybe Katherine, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself first before we start like the sessions, the main topic discussion?
Sure. So, hello everyone. I'm Katherine. I am a UX researcher. I'm located in California in the United States. My current role, I have been a UX researcher at Gitlab for around 3 years now. So my background is in psychology. That's what I studied in university. And then I went from there to UX research. Looking forward to talking to you all.
Okay, well, thank you very much for a pretty kind of short introduction, actually. So, actually, first thing for the discussion is like, how do you get into the UX research, and what is so special of being UX researcher in GitLab, or maybe for the beginning first, like, what is actually a UX research?
Sure. So I had my start in psychology. I was training to go more towards the academic side of research. So doing studies around cognitive neuroscience. But then I took some design classes later on in my university courses, and that got me interested in product design. And so I started to learn more about the different roles in startup companies and how they all interact with each other. And at first I thought I wanted to go towards UX design, but then I realized that UX research was a good path for me because it combined different elements. So knowledge of UX design principles, knowledge of psychology, but also some elements of strategizing and product management, just different roles kind of interacting. So that's why I went towards UX research. And I have found that it has been a pretty interesting role. It's so what's special about it is that you get to work with a lot of different roles in a company. So a lot of my days are spent working with product managers and product designers. That's at least at GitLab, that's who I communicate with the most. But I also will communicate with developers and our leadership as well. So just learning how to communicate to different audiences and sharing the information I'm learning with different audiences, I think is a pretty special role.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, that's actually really interesting. So yeah, so how does UX research like impacts some kind of product decision?
Yeah, so I think UX research is very important at a couple different phases throughout product development. So ultimately, you're trying to build confidence in your designs, confidence in your direction. So say you're early on and you need to know um, who are we trying to design for? Who is our target audience? What do they need? What experiences do they have? How can we create a product or a service that resonates with them? Then you would do some exploratory research to reach out to those users and understand who they are, understand their challenges, their motivations, their pain points. And from that, you can start to paint a picture of how your solution can help them. So I think research is really important at that stage to help you narrow down from all the problems you could potentially solve to the problems that are most important to your potential customers. And then once you start to learn about those potential customers and you have some potential designs and services, what you can do then is start to test them. So as you create a design, as you create a new service, depending on your product, you can reach out to those users, have them give feedback on it, provide insight into, does this solve the problem that they have? Is this an interesting offering for them? Is this website usable, or do they run into troubles? So at that point, it's really beneficial to do research so that you don't spend a lot of development resources on things that may not be interesting to your customers, or it's not very usable, it's very buggy, or things like that. So you can do that research as a way to test it before it even goes into production. And then I think at the last phase, it's kind of this continuous cycle of feedback. So after something is live, starting to get feedback on how it's working for people over time. Are any problems coming up? Is there a way that we can iterate on this feature and continue to develop that functionality? Things like that. So research is present throughout the whole cycle, but depending on the phase, you might use different methods.
Okay, so I see that. So how do you turn like all of the research finding that you found or the insight that you created, and from that, how do you figure out to turn that feedback into something like actionable insight or like reality?
Yeah, so I think it's very important for every research study to start with a clear set of questions that you have. And those questions are what you're going to try to answer with the findings from your research. So oftentimes when I'm doing a study, I'll have my initial set of questions and then also some hypotheses. So I predict that users might have trouble with this, or if we change this part of the design, it'll be easier for users to do this. I'll have some hypotheses like that so that at the end of the study, what I'm doing in that final insight summary is trying to answer those initial research questions. Did I observe that behavior? If I didn't, what else did I see? Can we move forward with this design? Was it a successful design or not? What are some next steps we can take from this? Do we need to do follow-up research? Are there some usability issues that we can already fix? What I'm trying to do is answer those initial research questions and kind of tie it all together. And another part of that is kind of creating a story. So when you're sharing your findings with your stakeholders, which could be everybody on the call, you want to give them the background of why did we even do this research study? So why was it important? What did we want to learn? And then you kind of tell them how you conducted the research. What method did you use? Who did you speak to? And then the outcome of it. What did you learn from it? And what does that mean for the next step?
Oh, yeah.
a question?
Yes, there's a question from Aldo. Yes, please, Aldo.
Yep. Actually, yeah, I think it's very great that you already said from the beginning like what you want to do and what is the set of questions and what hypothesis that you have. But I'm more interested in how do you construct the user interview itself. Is it like do you create it like more of like open-ended question, or do you want to guide the way of the questions to your hypothesis, or how is the best way you can uh, interpret what users need from your questions?
Yeah, so I would say when you're in kind of the exploratory phase, so you're trying to learn something about your users, how I usually will construct my interview is that I'll start with the first 5 to 10 minutes with warm-up questions. I'm asking them who they are, what are their common tasks, what tools do they use, what's a day like for them. I'm trying to just paint a picture of who they are as a person, as a consumer. And then in the next segment, I'm starting to get into the specific topics. So say I wanted to talk about their interactions with in terms of thinking of GitLab, like their interactions with our issue trackers. So like where you create your tasks. Then I might start to ask them, how do you plan your work? What tools do you use to plan your work? And then they might say GitLab. I'll say, which parts of GitLab do you use? And then I'll start to get into what's working well, what's not working well. And then they start to tell me more and more. So basically I go in with a set of questions I want to ask them. And then they often will start to take me down a certain path, and I'll have to choose, do I want to ask more about that, or do I want to go the other direction? And then I'll close it out with usually some general questions that are kind of like tying it all back together. If you had to give me 3 ways you would like to improve this feature, what are those ways and why? Like some type of question to tie it together. That way I always know that I can answer those research questions. So just to kind of overview of that, what I'm doing is setting up to get to know them in a general way. Then I have some questions that are directly related to the research questions or hypothesis, and then I kind of take it broader again to tie it all together. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Katherine.
You're welcome.
Wow, interesting. Like, anybody have another question actually? No? Okay, so continue actually. One thing that I actually kind of like curious, like we know that research is important, like everyone know that we should do it or they should do it, but they don't know how to. So how does someone start getting into doing research, like if they know next to nothing about it?
Yeah, that is a great question. I would say that if you know next to nothing, the best thing you could start to do is to write down your questions. So as you're designing something, or as you're developing something, or even as you're creating the product strategy, just writing down those questions that you have. Who is this going to target? How might they think about this? What problems could they run into? Just the questions you naturally have. I just start to write those down. And then you might see that some of them are related and they can become something you use in an interview. I'll speak with some customers just about this set of questions that I have. Or you might find that they're pretty straightforward and they're more about maybe like the demographic or something, and you could do a survey. It's kind of more straightforward, closed yes or no questions. You might be able to just do a survey. If it's something that requires deeper thought, or you need to observe someone using your product, then you can think, okay, I'll arrange to have an interview with someone, or I'll just watch them on Zoom or something as they do their work. You start to, from that original list of questions, you start to see the different methods that they could relate to. But I would say it probably starts with just writing down those questions you have, coming up with some hypotheses. Because usually when we're making a design or product decision, we have some type of, I would call it might or might not be the answer. And so then your research is a way to investigate that. You might find out that you were right, or you might find out that you were wrong. But that's kind of where I usually start. But the most basic research UX research methods, which could be like interviewing, surveys, some information architecture things like card sorting, tree testing. There's usually some great guides out there for the very basic research methods that you could use.
Okay, well, I see. So actually moving on to my next question is actually about usability testing. And what is actually a usability testing for you as a UX researcher? Like, for example, my understanding of usability testing is like exposing all the problems, like exposing what works really well for the users and understanding why. But like research is not really like that. It's like saying is a screwdriver better than a hammer. So it's like depends on like what we're trying to find out. So what actually usability testing for you as a UX researcher?
Yeah. So I can give you a couple examples. So one example that often comes up is that in, say, a survey or on Twitter, if we get feedback from social media and someone says, GitLab, this product feature really sucks. And here's why. Sometimes they'll tell you why, sometimes they won't tell you why. But you start to get some similar feedback from people saying, this is really difficult to use, or this is buggy, or I don't understand it, it's confusing. So at that point, we might say, okay, let's do a usability testing study to see if we can observe people as they complete those tasks and then measure how well they can do that. So with the usability testing study, what you would do is create a list of tasks that you would have your participants go through. So if I wanted to test how well people could create an email or something, write an email, I would give them tasks that would take them through the flow of creating an email. And perhaps at the end of each task, I'd say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how easy or difficult was it to complete that task? Tell me a bit more about your experience there. So what we're doing is seeing, can they complete the task successfully? Maybe how long did it take them to complete that task? Did they run into any errors when they were trying to complete the task? So you're kind of testing each part of a flow to see, could they successfully do it? And if not, what stopped them from achieving that task? And another scenario where usability testing could be helpful is if you have maybe a prototype. And so you want to see this design proposal, does it work well? And so you can give them a task to complete using that prototype and see, okay, were they able to do it? Yes, this might be a successful design. If not, maybe we can make some changes to this design to improve it before it goes out into production or something like that.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay, so back to the other. Do you have any questions? Okay, please.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for that actually. So in this case, do you think would it be like biased if you create a flow for them? Let's say, for example, there's a new email function, and then you create a flow to create an email, right? This test, the user is presented with the step that they need to take. So would it need be biased because they know the step already? We already tell them the steps, right? So from this set of user that we test them, we ask them to test the new functionality, they would understand it because they know the step, right? Because we tell them the steps. But when we test it with user that don't have the list of steps that they need to take, so I think, yeah, is that an accurate testing, especially for intuitiveness of the app, right? Usually what we do is like there's a new app, there's a new functionality to create an email, try to fund it, like something like that. Okay? So we have two different approach, right? So what do you think about that? What do you think about that two different approach with giving the case, the steps, and or app user find it out by themselves?
Yeah, so you're bringing up a great point. And what I like to do is basically have them try to find it out first, at least once in the session. So usually I'm starting with the open-ended scenario. Imagine that you are a product manager and you want to plan the work for the next 2 weeks or something like that for your team. How would you get started on that? Usually I'll give them an open-ended thing just to get their initial impressions of where they'll go. And then they'll tell me, okay, here's what I would do and here's what I wouldn't do. And so then I'm just giving them broad open-ended tasks and seeing what they do. Now, in the case where I need them to actually interact with a certain feature, because that's the main point, then after giving them those open-ended questions, I might be more specific and direct them a little bit more of where to go. But I always start open-ended just to see their initial impression. I think that usually gives you a balance where you can see them behaving naturally, but you could also make sure that they test the functionality that you need to test.
I see.
And there's also, for example, if you were doing something like related to jobs to be done or personas, you would want to keep it more open-ended because you're not trying to bias them to use a certain solution or a certain tool. But if you're doing something that's a bit more specific, then it's usually okay to have a more targeted set of tasks. It usually depends a bit of the phase you're in. Like, are you still exploring? Are you still trying to build confidence into whether this is the right solution? Or is this like an existing feature that everyone already knows about and you just want to see how they interact with it?
I see. Cool. Back to Nadia.
Oh, sorry. So is there anyone want to ask another follow-up question actually? Yeah, okay. Moving on actually. So okay, this actually is the next question. How is a UX or user experience testing or usability testing related to the quality assurance test? Like, are they the same or they should be different?
So this is a good question. From what I know, because I'm actually not very close to quality assurance testing, so maybe that's an answer in itself. But the usability testing is usually, well, in an ideal state, you're doing it before you've even created anything, before you've implemented it or put it into production or whatnot. You're testing design concepts, you're seeing whether they work well or whether they don't work well. And then you're making changes based off of that before you go live. And I guess after that point, that's when you would start the quality assurance testing. But that's a good question. I think they can be related, but they're probably happening at different stages and by different people in your company. Like, I think a QA person, maybe they're more closely working on the actual code. That I'm not too sure, but that's what I would say. With the UX researcher, we're more about observing the person and how they're using the product and observing, getting their feedback on it, how they're performing on it. And I think the QA person is more related to how the code is running. But maybe anyone else has thoughts on that.
Okay, well, actually, that's actually a really good point. Is there anyone want to add something? No, I mean, it's an open discussion, so it's feel free to say something, actually. Yeah, okay, so actually, this from what I just thinking, like we're always have this kind of like mentality of versus. Like, I mean, do you think that there's a better way of research, like with qualitative or quantitative? Or is that like just, I mean, like depends on what problem we're trying to solve? Like, is there one better than the other, or it just doesn't really work that way?
So, so this one is interesting because oftentimes the quantitative research and insights will catch more attention from what I've seen. it feels more concrete to people. It feels more like, okay, this is the hard data, this is the facts. But oftentimes the qualitative data will paint a bigger picture. So the quantitative might tell you how often someone is clicking on this part of the website, but you might not really know why they're clicking on it, or what happens after they click on it, or how they felt about having to go click there. So it's usually best to have a combination of the two. Maybe you've learned certain things from the data and you have some hypothesis that you want to test, or you want to ask people about this behavior that you observed in the data. Or maybe you had an interview with maybe 5 people and you were starting to hear some challenges, but you don't know if that affects everybody. So you might run a survey to get more data on how common the problem is. So in my opinion, they go best together, kind of hand in hand, where you use one to complement the other.
Oh, I see. So like like GitLab is known for its working or like remote working culture, right? So
Yeah.
how does how does a GitLab conduct the usability testing? Like for my experience, when I did some research, it's more like conventional way. Like we go to like the way I approach it, like we go to a cafe or bars and we would approach people to like like spend their 10-15 minutes to do, I don't know, like testing our products, for example. But now we're in a pandemic. How do you do the remote like testing? Are you more into the remote unmoderated, which like you use software where you just laid all the data and you get the results, or into more like remote moderated where you have to like schedule one by one with users? So how do you do it in GitLab?
Yeah, so we have we do it in several ways depending on the goal of the study, but I would say our most common ways would be moderated interviews if we want to speak with a customer to learn more about their problems, or to learn about to get their feedback on a certain area that we might try to develop a new feature or something like that. Then moderated usability testing for studies that might have more complex tasks or flows where someone might get stuck, or maybe the login credentials won't work or something like that. If it's a little bit more complex, we'll do it moderated, but we do also use unmoderated software. Right now we're using user testing. So for prototypes or design evaluations that are more straightforward, our designers can just create a study directly in user testing, and then it's unmoderated and they can collect feedback on that. And then we also do surveys, which can be done from the comfort of your own room, like this one. You can just launch a survey. We use Qualtrics for that. And then we also, if we have things related to information architecture, so navigation, the labeling of your content on your website, or things like that, we also use some tools called Optimal Workshop, which we could do card sorting and tree testing, which are basically different ways to understand how people organize and categorize content. So do the issues go with the milestones and the roadmap? Does the metrics go with analytics? Things to understand how people are categorizing features. We would use Optimal Workshop, which is another tool. And if we wanted to see more information about why they categorize it a certain way, we might do that moderated. So we'll have most of them be unmoderated, but then maybe get a sample of like 5 of them just to observe how they're actually thinking out loud about the process. So commonly we just use Zoom for our interviews, or any, I think before we were using Hangouts, just any type of what do we call it, web conferencing service. You could use those for interviewing. That usually works pretty well. And we use Calendly for scheduling as well. Yeah, but those are kind of the main tools and ways that we conduct research.
Okay, so back to the other. Do you have any follow-up question or another questions maybe? Okay, then I will move to. Okay, so do you think like as someone who
Uh,
works at
I think we have a question.
Vidi, ask question.
sorry, Speedy? Okay, please, Speedy. Sorry.
Hi, Catherine. Nice to meet you. My name is Fidi. Sorry, I was a bit late. I am a developer in Bukit Vista. Usually, I work in development, backend, front end, full stack, basically. So this is actually really exciting because usually I work in small projects, and even in my previous careers, I've never had an experience working directly with a UX researcher. So from what you mentioned, I just wanted to confirm that not for US research is not mandatory for every product, especially products that are straightforward. Is that correct, Catherine?
So what I would say is that I would treat it almost like different questions that are relating to your level of confidence. But it's not only your level of confidence, it's also why you're confident about it. Because that's something that people forget. Because you could just say, I'm confident about it because I know. But I would ask you, why are you confident? Did you see some industry data that this is a feature that's in high demand? Or is this a pattern that's common in competitor tools, things like that? So basically, oftentimes when there's low confidence about a design, or it might be a change that breaks someone's workflow, or it could be a confusing concept, that's when the researcher will come in. But if it's something that's a bit more straightforward, you have higher confidence in your design, this is something that's present in a lot of other products, you know, it's a common design pattern, things like that,
Yeah.
you might prioritize research less. If you can do research, it's always great, but oftentimes the resources are limited, so you have to prioritize kind of based off
Yep.
the confidence and the
So
severity, perhaps.
I see. So as best as possible, we should always test our features confidence against the UX research method. But when resources are low, we can just prioritize and choose which product should be tested against these methods, right?
Yeah, and you might try to determine, is this product getting in front of kind of like the majority of our user base or something like that? Because that's something that'll be in front of everyone, that'll get a lot of usage. You want to make sure that works really well. And if it has complex workflows, you definitely want to test those as well. But maybe it's you're making a smaller change to an existing feature. It'd be great if you could test it, but you might not really need to go through a full research process there if it's something a bit more well-known to you or common in other products.
May I ask another question? Sorry, it's a bit jumpy,
Sure.
but basically one other thing is about the supervision of a feature, right? So you mentioned that just now UX supervise features, or am I getting the wrong signal here? So you mean after it's been launched, do you guys like monitor the usage of each features, and what kind of tools do you guys use in this supervision? Is it like Google Analytics, or are there any other tools?
Yeah, good question. So with GitLab, we have a couple ways of doing it. It's an open source project, so it's open source product. So we have an issue tracker where a lot of our customers will open a ticket and they'll say, hey, here's this thing that happened, or this thing might be broken. So we're using our issue tracker as one method for monitoring feedback. Then we also check our social media channels. Those are all often popular ways that people will give us feedback as well. So we review our social media channels, our forums, just different places where people are leaving feedback. Maybe there's a product review page. We would also monitor that. And in this case, it's because we release so many features every month that we don't have as much of a way to track the progress and how well it's going for all of them. So that's like more of that realistic perspective where some of them, they go out into production and you don't check on them again for a long time until someone tells you it's broken. That happens too. But as much as you can keep track of them, things like, I think you could probably use things like analytics, or if you have product usage data, things like that. And also if you have like support tickets or those sort of things, that also
I
is a
see.
way to look
So,
into the feedback.
a UX researcher is very much involved in the discovery process of a product, no, Catherine?
Yeah.
Because from the problems that our users complain to us, like, or report to us, then we kind of like have to formulate this. Uh, so after discovering, do they actually also formulate the product or just report the findings of the report to, let's say, the product manager or the product owner?
Yeah, so here is another thing that'll differ a lot in companies. In smaller companies, you might have a team that just has a designer who's doing research,
Mm-hmm.
or you might have a few designers and maybe one researcher or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. In GitLab, we have a dedicated research team, about 6 researchers, and then we have probably like 40 designers and like 40 PMs. So in our case, we're mainly, our main goal is to report that research finding
I
back
see.
to the designers, because the designers are kind of like the main people who will handle design, and the PMs are kind of the main people who are handling another piece, and the researchers are dedicated to research and mentoring um, the designers and PMs, and how to understand the findings, and how to know where to go next, and how to build confidence in their designs. But in cases where you have a smaller company, it's oftentimes you might have either a designer who is doing research or a researcher who also has design skills. And then you would see more of that situation where they're taking the findings and then they're translating those findings into a design.
I see. Right. Because I'm a bit. That's the part where I get a little bit confused. So, as a UX researcher, they collect this feedbacks and also reports from users. Then they report their findings. Who do they report to actually? So, do they report it to the product managers or the designers? In which stage? Because what we mentioned before is still in the discovery process, and the feature itself or the product itself has not entered the product life cycle, right? And from my understanding, the product managers will create the user story, the background, and so on and so forth. So, do they report directly to the product managers? Because just now you mentioned that you don't really interact with the product managers. How does it look like in GitLab?
Yeah. So in GitLab, how it looks like is that, to give you a simplified version of it, we have problem validation and solution validation.
Mm-hmm.
So in the problem validation phase, that's where the researcher is
Yep.
mainly collaborating with the product manager. So usually they have a problem they want to investigate, or maybe a problem they know about, but they want to get more data on how common it is, who it affects, things like that. So that's where we're collaborating directly with the product manager, and we'll report to them. We'll share what we're learning from the study, and then they'll use that to determine, okay, should we go forward with this feature proposal? Maybe we don't want to go forward with that, or figuring out the next steps. In the solution validation stage, that's usually when a problem is already defined, and you already have the feature proposal.
Mm-hmm.
A design phase has already occurred, basically. So we're working with the designer to test their design proposal with users. We're working with them to see, is this design successful? Is it confusing? Is there any way it can be improved before it moves into development? So that's how it works at GitLab. We're often kind of in between the two phases. In the exploratory or problem discovery phase, we're working with product managers. Then once that feature is maybe approved or kind of thrown away, it moves on to the design phase. And then you have another research opportunity where you're trying to evaluate that design, and see how well it works and if it should move to development. That's in like the perfect world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes it's a little mixed up, where maybe the designer got some user stories that weren't validated with research before, so then they need to do some problem discovery to because they don't really know who they're
Yep.
designing for.
Yep.
They just
Yep.
got this request and they're like, I don't even know who this is for, what they need. So they might need to do some problem discovery. And instead of just and we also work with them in that phase. It's not just that we only work with you when your design is done. It depends kind of on what their needs are at a different phase.
I see. Then maybe last question from me. Sorry, I asked a lot of questions. I'm just
No,
really
feel free to ask
excited
more.
to like actually meet a UX designer that can actually provide us with solutions. Uh, One other thing. This is more of a human resource problem. So, for example, as a UX researcher, to what extent do UX researchers have to understand the technicalities of underlying software structures and so on and so forth? Because how do you validate a solution uh, if you don't understand the technicalities of like technicals, or is it just the solution in the eyes of the users, or does it have to also call include the technical aspects to it?
So I can answer this question very well as a UX researcher who works at GitLab, which is creating software for
Yep.
engineers, security people, PMs, basically a lot of people who aren't researchers and a lot of people I don't necessarily know their day-to-day life. The the secret is the secret is during that problem discovery phase, a lot of the times we're just listening. We get on the interview. We tell them to basically just tell us everything. We have to be very good at note taking and understanding what story is being told, and then we present that story to the product manager, who usually has the deeper understanding of something. And then that product manager works with the developer who has a deeper understanding of whether something is feasible or not. So in this sort of case where you have a lot of different people working on it, the researcher doesn't need to have as much of a close knowledge of what's technically feasible, but it's very helpful, especially when you get into very technical conversations about like our merge request feature or code review or things like that. So you kind of learn about it over time, and the more you know, the better. But in a case where you have a bigger chain of people working on it, you don't need to be as close to the technical side of things. But if you're in a situation where there's maybe one researcher or one designer who does research, it's very important to communicate with a developer early as possible, rather than just saying, okay, users want a new notification center because the current one doesn't work well. So when are you going to produce that? Because then there might be all these considerations as to why we weren't able to create that notification center before. You kind of want to bring in the developers and product managers as early as possible, and not just assume everything the user wants is possible at this time or something like that. There usually has to be a discussion about what to do next. Even if the findings tell you that users want this and they need this, sometimes it's not feasible.
Yep.
But you might put it on your roadmap as to something you'll investigate in the future or something like that.
I see. Sorry, one follow-up question just popped up in my mind just now when you mentioned that you had this discussion with designers and also maybe PMs and also developers. In that discussion, I'm just we've been always working. I've always worked for a small groups, so usually all the people involved in that group is involved in the discussion. But in big groups such as big companies such as GitLab, uh, do you involve are all the people involved in this discussion, or just the leads of like lead designer and lead software engineer, or how does it work like?
So that's a good question. So how it will usually go is that each research project has a set of stakeholders. It's usually
Yep.
whoever came with the initial proposal. So like I was describing those two phases of problem validation and solution validation, usually one person has brought the research request forward, but there are a couple other people who need to be involved in all the discussion. And that's usually the designer, the engineer, and the PM who are working on that feature, along with the researcher. But we try to hold a bigger meeting if we're sharing findings so that other people can be involved and understand what we learned from it. But at the minimum, we have kind of the direct stakeholders, the direct people who
I
will
see.
make decisions regarding that feature. And we have a lot of different small groups. because we have a lot of different product areas. So oftentimes you'll have little groups of 3 to 4 people discussing things, and then a bigger conversation to discuss. It's kind of like you start to come to a decision in that smaller group, and then you bring it up to the bigger group just to kind of sense check or get other things you might have missed in that smaller group discussion, so that you don't just make changes without considering other people as well.
Yep. Okay, I think that's that. Maybe lastly, I would like to say that I use GitLab a lot, and I'm a fan, so it's really
Oh,
exciting. Thank you.
okay. See, in this point, I might be wondering, what does he use GitLab for? How's his experience been so
Yep.
far? What would he improve? That's kind of like
I
immediately
guess.
what starts to come. But I won't ask you that right now.
Okay, back to Nadia.
Okay, okay, thank you. Actually, I have a follow-up question. Is in my opinion, like UX researcher biggest problem is, I mean, biggest challenge is to get those who aren't in the field with them, like to really understand what the people the design is intended for, right? Like, how do you convince the product teams that, for example, the notification page or the navigation page that they really needs to be changed because, let's say, the findings, the insight that you create. So how do you convince the people, the product teams, for example?
Yeah, this is a hard one because oftentimes you have the user needs or the user goals, and then you have the business needs and the business goals. And in the perfect world, they align. The user wants this, and what do you know? This was also a business priority. But oftentimes, and especially if you're working in a product like GitLab, where it's very large, lots of different features, lots of requests coming in, lots of different personas who are using GitLab. So engineers, product managers, designers, uh, executives, a lot of different people using it. There's a lot of different use cases, and we only have our limited resources from our development team. So basically, in that sort of situation, it's oftentimes a question of the severity and it's either like the demand or the impact. Like, some things you're considering are, is this a product area with a lot of usage? Is this a product area that's kind of covers the majority of our user base? Is this a feature that affects a lot of different people, and how does it affect them? Is it something that just annoys them, or is it something that blocks them from completing a task or completing their workflow? Is this something that might prevent them from renewing GitLab? So when you have constraints on your resources, it's often times getting more into that prioritizing and figuring out the demand and the usage levels as well. But then you also have the straightforward things that are kind of like, if it's a bug and it's a severe bug, we prioritize that, fixing that bug. But if it's like nice to haves or new functionality, then it gets more into the demand and what potential revenue gain is there and what would we lose if we didn't do that, those sort of trade-offs. But the researcher will always try to present the story. Here's what I learned, here's why it's important, here's what it impacts. And then sometimes it kind of goes from there into the PM or the leadership to kind of make the final call on whether it will be, when it will be addressed. That answer that question?
Yes. Yeah, it actually really answered the questions that I was asking. So, okay, moving on about the SUS. It's actually my main topic, actually, the system usability scale. So yeah, I've read it, like, I also discovered your video where you like explaining about the SUS in GitLab, and also I found out that in GitLab you do it quarterly, right? So how does doing it quarterly, I mean doing the SUS measurement, for example, impacts the product's experience in GitLab?
So this one has been a interesting topic. I say that about everything because everything is an interesting topic. But basically, I'll give you some context. We started running that quarterly survey at the beginning of, what was it, 2019? What was it? Ah, I forgot. Anyway, I think we've run it like 7 times by now. In the beginning, it was just kind of something we were using to get a sense of how we were doing, a sense of our overall usability. And basically, it's the questions in that scale are getting at how learnable your product is, how usable it is. Is it easy to use? Would someone come back here? Would they recommend it to someone else? Do they think they need the help of other people to use GitLab? Things like that. It's kind of like an overall sense check of how usable your product is. And so at first, we were just using it as a measurement like that. But then we started trying to pinpoint it a bit more. And so now what we're doing is we include an open text question in each survey, and we get feedback from users that they could describe why they gave us that rating. And so what we do is we take those feedback points and we look for themes. And so oftentimes the feedback is pointing towards issues with navigation or issues with the merge requests. It's buggy, the performance is bad, things like that. We start to look deeper into the themes coming out of those, the feedback from our users, and we can use that to start prioritizing areas that might help us improve the score, which is another way of helping us improve the overall usability of GitLab. So the score will give you the overall measurement that you can kind of track over time and see how you're doing. As you make product changes, is that score increasing, decreasing, staying the same? And then that open-ended question that we include is what we use to drill down deeper into why they gave us that score and if there are themes in the problems that people are experiencing. And the spoiler alert is that there are themes, at least with GitLab. A lot of it has to do with navigation, discovering new features, status. So is the system telling me what I need to do next? Is it telling me why I reached that error? Things like that. UI polish. Is the button kind of out of the way? And are there just things here that are making it less of a pleasing experience? There's usually some things that it ties to, and our product teams can use that to improve their areas. It's almost like having usability heuristics. It's telling you, if you improve things related to these themes, you can start to see improvements over time with the score. So that's how we're using it. It's quarterly. Quarterly might not be the best cadence in our case because we actually have a lot of development work going on every month. And honestly, it feels like the 3 months in quarter go by very quickly, and you might not make a lot of changes that have affected the overall experience. You might have made changes to one little piece of GitLab that someone may or may not have seen yet. So quarterly might not even be the best cadence there, but we're doing it kind of to have a consistent measurement. But that's one thing to keep in mind. If you are not making a targeted improvement, then you might not see that score improve. So they kind of go hand in hand. You learn from it, and then you make the action, and then you see if there's a change over time. But the score, you try not to get too obsessed with that score. It's easy to get obsessed with, why did it go down? Does that mean the UX team is like, I don't know, no longer doing what they're supposed to do? But no, you try to take it more, okay, over the course of a year, how did this score change? Or did it go up or down? What does that mean? Did the type of feedback we receive change? Are we seeing more people mention navigation or less people mention navigation? Things like that. That's how we're currently using it.
Okay, that's actually a really interesting topic. Yeah, is there anyone have another follow-up question maybe? No, okay then, I'll move forward. So, do you think that GitLab have a really good user experience? And yeah, and what kind of indicators that you use that say, I mean, other than the SUS methodology, what kind of, what other indicators that you use to measure that GitLab has a good user experience?
So this one will really depend on who you talk to. And I say that as the researcher who is reading all of the feedback. Because basically, sometimes we have people who have been using GitLab for maybe 3 or 4 years, and they use maybe two areas. They track their issues and they create merge requests. And they're like, okay, it works for what I need it to do, not too buggy, not too crazy. And then we have some people who have very heavy usage of GitLab. And so they're going from one point to another. They're trying to find new features to use. They're working with a lot of people in there, and they're like, I can't see what I'm working on. I can't find it all in one place. It's hard to discover what I need. It's hard to navigate back and forth. So I would say that overall, and from what we've seen in the survey, GitLab has probably like an okay user experience. It can be better though. It can be a lot better, but overall, people are able to accomplish the task they need to accomplish. But our goal is to make them accomplish it with more ease and with more delight. So that's like where we're at. We're at the place where there's a lot of room for improvement, for it to be an easier experience, for people to find things faster and easier, for people to experience less bugs in certain places. But overall, people are able to accomplish their tasks. So that's why you end up in the scenario where when you're talking to your leaderships or your PMs, sometimes you're like, it would be really important to fix this usability issue. But then it's like, well, they are still able to complete what they need to do. So maybe we can put that on the back burner for now and go do this. But you run into those sort of things. But I would say some indicators for good UX are kind of following those principles, those heuristics. If someone makes an error, can they recover from that error? Or are they going to like lose all their data and have to go from the beginning, start again from the flow? If they go somewhere else, is it easy to find where they came from and get back to it? So how easy is it to navigate? If they're reading about your terms, like the terms that you use to label the content in your website, does it make what are some other things? Also kind of the workflow. Are they able to complete a workflow, complete a task from start to finish? Or do they get stuck somewhere and they need to look for support and like figure out where to go next? And when they're stuck, is there some documentation or help along the way? It's basically, I would say good UX considers what the user is trying to accomplish in the interface and gives them kind of different ways to accomplish that or recover from mistakes and also figure out where to go next. That's how I guess I would interpret it.
Okay, wow, thank you very much. Actually, I actually learned a lot from that. Yeah, and I read some kind of documentation that you wrote actually in the GitLab somewhere. Yeah, actually, I still have a lot of questions, but sadly, we're now running out of time. Yeah, we're like 1 hour now, actually, and I think like a lot of people now have their own schedule after this. So, yeah, well, thank you very much, Katherine. Actually, today's discussion is actually really interesting.
You're welcome.
Okay, is there anyone who
Thank you,
wants to say
Katherine.
something to Katherine though?
Yeah, you're very
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
Actually, we should ask Katherine. Katherine, do you have any question for us to ask? Yeah.
Yes. So I do have questions. So, what are some of your most? Do you have any research questions? I guess I'm wondering some things as you're starting to get started in research. Are there things you're already wondering about, or things you already want to test? And what kind of things would that be?
Actually, this is something that we heavily discuss, like because our user base is actually pretty unique. Not right. I think GitLab have a user, right? They are tech savvy. They know what to do. They know what to technology they use, and around tech savvy people is good, right? But what we are doing now is we are trying to bring technology to the non-tech savvy user. So this non-tech savvy user is like exactly what you imagined. That they are like the previous generation senior, mostly settled. I mean, they are not in the stage of want to learn new technology or learn new tools. What they need is just basically something that just works, maybe like a TV, right? Like when you push the button, then it's turned on, and then you click just one button to change the channel, and then one button to change the volume. So they expect something like that, right? So, uh, so that is our biggest question: should technology for these people, or what kind of product that we should deliver to these people? I mean, we offer some options. We offer like there's the online solution, right? They need access to their reports. Basically, they're usually a property owners, right? So they want a report of their investment. What are the profit that they are them an email with a spreadsheet, and they're okay with that, surprisingly, right? But the problem is that we cannot create a report for like hundreds or thousand properties every month. Enough research to do that manually. So we want to do it in a more automatic and more like clean way, basically. But the problem is the a few of our attempt to deliver that is being seen as we made too complicated for them, and so that is actually our biggest research question. So how can we bring something that's it's so simple, technically complicated for us to provide that and we want to bring something that it's simple for us to deliver, but still simple enough for this to use it. So I think that's it. That's our biggest question right now. The user adoption. I think it's that it's the user of the
Yeah. See, that's great right there, because there you have all the questions. You have some, I would say, probably facts that you know, but also maybe assumptions or hypotheses about your user base. So then I would just suggest like kind of mapping out everything you know about them so far. Do you know how they currently do things? So how they currently manage their problems, what challenges that they feel that they have, what's kind of like the priority, what would be the ideal solution. And then once you kind of gather that data from them and you have an idea of what a solution could be, that's when you start to test it with them. So you have the example of them finding it complicated. What you can do is test your design proposal with them to see how they perform on it. What are they not understanding? Where are they getting the perception of the technology, or is the actual experience that is challenging in some way? You can start to run a test to kind of dig deeper and then make design changes. And you might have kind of test, okay, we're in the design and testing phase of how well this solution works. And you kind of have to think about who needs to be part of these tests. Like, what is a representative sample? So If you want to design for older
Yes, yes. I think we're running out of time already. So yeah, once again, thank you very much, Catherine, and yeah, hopefully that we can have another session again, maybe because I still have a lot of questions actually. Yeah,
Yeah, this was great. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to have another session like this, or if you want to do it one-on-one, just let me know.
yeah,
I would be
sure, sure.
happy to talk again.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much, like Catherine and everyone for I mean for attending the session. So yeah, I will end it either. Yeah, thank you.